Hey everybody, just wanted to do another We Are All Veterans podcast, especially today because of the historical significance of it. It is June 6th, 2024, which I'm not a big math guy. That being said, I can do some basic math. 80 years ago today, some great, well-disciplined, hard men did something pretty important for the world, and that is D-Day. June 6th, 1944, a bunch of guys from America, Great Britain, Canada, and several other countries. Believe it or not, there's like 13 countries that were involved in the D-Day operations, aka Operation Overlord, that went in to liberate France. And today I wanted to kind of do a quick special episode just to kind of highlight the achievements of those brave men who did go across the English Channel shortly after midnight. A group of them flew in on C-47s from various airborne regiments and parachuted in to occupied Normandy in northern France to basically establish, control so that the main force landing could come in the next day. And that next morning was a pivotal moment in the history of the United States and Europe, in basically what culminated in the largest amphibious operation in world history. When those troops landed on the beaches, they landed under heavy gunfire, mortars, and a heavily mined area. It was chaos. I've heard some stories from guys who were there. This was years ago, that talk about how Saving Private Ryan did a pretty good job of telling it pretty close to the truth. And I will say that is incredibly huge. If you really think about it, like just what exactly transpired that day was a massive undertaking, both from a logistics standpoint and also a tactical standpoint, because you're talking about guys. I mean, this is technology. The 1940s was not nearly what we have today. They didn't have a whole lot of recon intelligence other than what was available at the time. Satellites didn't exist, obviously. Aerial photography was still relatively, I would say, on a grand scheme of things, was relatively still kind of in its infancy. They had done some of it in World War One from biplanes and a camera. In World War Two, they kind of got progressed a little further. It wasn't nearly to where it was, like, say, a couple decades later in the 60s, where they were able to get that photographic intelligence, the imagery analysis kind of really fine-tuned and hammered down. But they were good at what they did at the time. They looked at the pictures of Normandy, figured out, they planned this whole operation, what was the best beachhead to do the invasion on, and basically establish that control that basically made it so that they could achieve success. And I think that nowadays we kind of take a lot of that for granted, that, World War II, being a big history nerd that I am, World War II is one of those things. A friend of mine, shout out to JT Tatanka, he put it really good. When you get over 35, you've got a decision to make. You either become a World War II history buff or you smoke meats. He said, I do both. Me as well. I dabble in both. But it really is, like I've always been fascinated by World War II. Ever since I was a kid, I've just thought World War II is probably one of the most interesting contemporary historical time periods, and especially in American history, because of how pivotal of a role it really established the United States as a superpower. And it really kind of flooded the lexicon of the American psyche with this: what is a hero and what defines heroism in the American military. And I mean, granted, we had some pretty big shoes to fill in terms of historical wartime heroes. I mean, you've got all the guys from the Revolutionary War, the big names, the Paul Revere's, the George Washingtons, even the Thomas Jeffersons, all these big name guys from the Revolutionary War. And then you go forward into the War of 1812. You go into the various conflicts the United States was involved in, like the fight against the Barbary pirates, and then you go into what I would say the darkest times of American history, the Civil War. But you had these iconic figures emerge from that period as well, and then rolling into World War One, where my great grandfather fought. You had these big events, these big battles that took place, that these heroic figures emerged from. And then World War II really for me was kind of the peak of American military prowess and might, in the fact that we were fighting an enemy that it was a fairly pitched battle. We had our struggles throughout World War II, where I don't think a whole lot of the leadership really thought we were ever going to really lose, but there were some setbacks. Operation Market Garden, for instance, there were missteps and setbacks, but that was really what established America as the dominant military force in the world. And World War II was the liberation. I will say, not discounting what happened in the Pacific, but the liberation of Europe was a pivotal moment in world history, where good men stood up against evil and were able to emerge victorious, which I think is super awesome. I cannot underline enough the sacrifice and the dedication and just the sheer bravery and determination and grit, that special something that these guys had, that I don't think as many people have nowadays. Now, if you want to look at the historical context, that was really the last real big push of all-in-one America fight. If you really think about it, because think about the first Gulf War. Think about the global war on terror, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, even Operation Gothic Serpent in Somalia. None of those conflicts really took the full brunt of America getting behind the war effort. World War II was really the last time that the entire country would mobilize behind the war effort. You would have, the captains of industry putting forth technology, creating new innovative things to help America to be successful against the Nazis. And that was the real last time that the entire country got behind this massive, major push of a war effort that led to a lot of really, really big innovations, not just on the military side, but the civilian side as well. World War II saw the birth of radar. World War II saw the widespread use of radio technology that really kind of entered the modern age, where we could effectively communicate with one another. We're talking about news took a huge shift in the World War II era, where people were actually informed on what was going on, almost kind of in real time. There were some delays. They would have films, made, and then they would screen them. But that was really the first time that there was really that big of a momentum behind these technologies. And so I think on days like today, on June 6th, we need to recognize that this is none of this that we are living in right now was possible without the sacrifice of the brave men and the women that stood behind them, making that ultimate push to turn the tide of the war. And I've always said that there were some major turning points in World War II. We could go through a few of them. There was the turning point when Germany invaded the Soviet Union. My other channel, I've got a history channel that I created that I talk about what if that never happened, what would it look like? And it's fun to postulate on things like that. But the big turning points of the war, Germany invading the Soviet Union, that was a turning point in the war. That kind of that kind of started the beginning of the end for Germany. Pearl Harbor, the United States coming into the war and officially declaring war. And then you have D-Day, which was really the first big, huge push of American boots into occupied France, where there were fighters there beforehand. OSS had some guys there, but really it was the main force units getting into Normandy, and that was a huge turning point in the war. The invasion of Italy from the south. My mighty 10th Mountain Division coming in and fighting their way through the mountain terrain that constituted most of central Italy. Then you have all these other major turning points in the war, but really it was D-Day was kind of the major point where it marked the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime. And D-Day is such an important day in American history. I think we need to recognize that 80 years ago today is a pretty substantial historical moment that really shows what true American bravery and patriotism is all about. And it really was putting the best of the best in the best light. We're talking about guys who, 18, 19, 20, to I think there were some guys in their 30s and 40s, but really it was these young kids going off to fight for the ideals of freedom and to liberate the oppressed in France and the rest of Europe. And it was that mentality that led to victory. And I feel like today we're missing a lot of that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that those kind of people aren't around today. I feel like they're not as many. There's a lot of young men nowadays who don't feel that same sense of pride. There's a lot of people who don't feel the sense of pride in their country. We hear a lot of talk about people disparaging America, calling America the last great empire, calling America tyrannical, and this colonizers and all these negative things. But if you look past the negative and you see the amount of good we've done in the world, creating these ideas of freedom and liberty and self-determination, where we did kind of pave the way for a constitutional republic that was really one of a kind in its inception, and at the time hadn't ever been tried before. And to preserve that and spread the idea of liberty across the globe by liberating the European continent from a fascist dictatorship, I think is something that you can't really quantify. And in modern times, we haven't really seen a threat so great as Germany posed to the rest of the world in the 1930s and 40s. And so recognizing the sacrifice of these brave men that went and did something so monumentous, so just important and impactful for the world, that I really think that to kind of reflect on that is it's an amazing thing. What some of the great leaders of the time said, they recognized. I mean, even George Patton, one of the greatest generals to ever live, he even said it at the time before D-Day. That we're embarking on this endeavor in the Second World War. They recognized it was the Second World War, and he said all these very powerful things that got people really kind of pumped up. And I think one of the things we need to recognize is that without men like that, this world that we live in today couldn't be possible. And I really do, my hat's off to everybody who fought in World War II. All those great men who sadly so many are now long gone. 80 years later, I think that the majority of that generation has departed our earth and has left a lasting impact. They really were the greatest generation, and I think we have to reflect and give thanks that such great people existed, to maintain the way of life that we have today, to preserve and keep that. And I think it's really kind of interesting that we take a lot of our freedoms and a lot of these things for granted, when back then they were trying to live just like us, raise their families and live a fulfilling and wholesome life. And we kind of look at it and come back and say, they did some really, really important things for their country and for the world, and we just have to give thanks. So I think on days like today, we have to take a look at our brothers and sisters, and especially in the veteran community, and because we tried our best to fill those boots, and they were some pretty big boots to fill, especially considering that you had guys that did things that were really never asked of people before then, to go into the fray, to step into the breach. And it really kind of makes you, when you're about to step off into a foreign land and engage in that kind of activity that is combat, that is war, it really changes you, and it changes your perspective on the world. It really, I can only speak from personal experience, but for me, when I loaded up in that airplane at the airfield outside of Fort Drum, I felt like before the plane pushed back and the door closed, I was still a child. Granted, I was at the time, 23 or 24. I was still a child, and I left, and that childhood got left behind. And I went over, when I went overseas to Afghanistan, I didn't come back as a child. I didn't come back as that same person. I came back as a man, and something different, something had changed inside me. And I feel like in World War II, that same thing happened. When those guys left, the airfield in Pottery, England, to get on the C-47s and go literally jump out of a perfectly good airplane into occupied enemy territory where dozens of German soldiers were waiting for them. I think they left behind that same previous self, before they went over there. Those men that climbed down into the landing craft, as they were climbing down, I don't know exactly, but I can imagine they were probably shedding that skin of their former self and becoming a different person as they were getting ready to open the breach and go out onto the sand of Omaha Beach in Normandy and leave behind the innocence that they once held, and become a different person, having faced those challenges, those occasions, seeing their friends get killed next to them. I can't imagine just the true horror of that. And looking back, as we kind of see from 80 years in the future, after this event happened, looking back and just in awe of what they did. It's incredible to me that the amount of bravery it takes to look certain death right in the face and push and not give up and just do what you have to do, not only to survive yourself, but for the guy to your left and the guy to your right. I think that's something that very few people have ever had to do, and very few people have the guts and the fortitude to do so. And so for those people, we really have to thank them. Granted, I never served in a combat arms role, and saw very limited, I guess you could say, conflict in Afghanistan, aside from getting rocketed, a few instances of some sheer terror. But really, I didn't get into any firefights. I didn't get into gun battles. I didn't see that firsthand combat. And the men that did that, the people that did that, because I mean we had females as well doing that stuff. It was one of those things where you really have to take a look at those people and see that they're cut above. They're a different breed than the average American who enjoys life just living in the relative comfort of their home. And many Americans that I've met throughout the years, in my short time on this earth, I've met a lot of people who've never left the safety of the United States. Some never even left the lower 48, and never stepped outside into the bigger world. And so when you look at it in that perspective and see that 80 years ago these guys left their home to go fight in a war in a faraway land and do some pretty incredible things, I think that is something that is just beyond comprehension for most people, that what it takes to do that. And I think that today is a good day to reflect on that. And it's kind of fitting that we just had Memorial Day a few weeks ago, and I went and paid my respects to some of my fallen comrades that I've known over the years, a couple Vietnam veterans. One's a GWAT veteran that I lost earlier this year that was a good friend of mine. And you really have to look back and kind of reflect on the greatness of these people that helped make the world a better place in their own way. And I think that World War II, and especially D-Day, is one of those periods where we can look back and just thank God that we had such profound bravery that I think is becoming more and more rare as life gets more comfortable, as existence gets easier. And we need to look at what that really truly means. And I'm not asking anything of anyone. I would just say, if you choose to reflect on that and thank the Lord above that we have, the ability to live the life that we live today because of these people. And so I really want to just do this quick little episode about this, because it's an occasion and a day that's near and dear to my heart, being that I really tried to follow in the footsteps of those who came before me, who took that responsibility seriously and took such an awesome undertaking and really excelled. They succeeded in their mission and they succeeded in their goals. And I think that had it not been for that, we wouldn't be here today. So if you have a family member that had fought in World War II, that had been at the beaches in Normandy, had been at the landing zones outside of, just inside the coastline, thank you for your family member's contribution to our great country. And I know it is kind of hollow because you didn't do anything, but those who have family members, they know what their grandfather and their father or uncle or brother or what have you has done. And I think that right there is commendable, and definitely one of those things that I'm really grateful for. So I salute to every one of you who fought in World War II and helped to keep the idea of liberty alive and kept that fire of freedom burning. So thanks for tuning in. I look forward to talking to you all in the next one, and y'all have a great day. And my deepest thanks to those who gave their all on this day 80 years ago.